Hello and welcome to this Trailer Live session. My name is Philippe Ozil. I'm a developer evangelist at Salesforce, and on today's episode of Trailer Live, I have the pleasure to talk to you about how we can explore the different Salesforce APIs using a Postman collection that we assembled. Before I jump into the presentation, I need to give you the standard forward-looking statement. What this means is basically that you have to make your purchasing decisions based on what is commercially available in the product. And today it's especially important for this session because some of what I'm going to cover today, actually most of what I'm going to cover today, is a contribution made by Salesforce employees, but it is not part of the product itself. I'm going to be talking about a contribution for Postman, and this is just not part of the Salesforce offering. So bear that in mind when you purchase licenses. Right. That being said, here's our agenda for today. We're going to talk first about Postman in general. I'm going to cover some main concepts and features that you're going to be using with Postmans. And then I'll talk for a long time about the Salesforce APIs collection. This is what we're contributing, and this is what we're sharing with you as an open source project. Finally, I'll also open the door to how you can contribute to this particular project. I'll talk to you about how we are building the collection, how you can add to that to get even more from the project. All right, with no further ado, let's start with the first part of tonight's session. I'm going to be talking about Postman. So first I'm going to give you a bit of an overview about what Postman is, and I'm going to talk about some specific features so that you know a bit how Postman works before I dive into the Salesforce specific part. So this is Postman. The screen capture you see here on the slide here is a capture of Postman. This is a desktop application that you install on your computer. It works for any type of OS, whether you're using Linux, Windows, or Mac. And what this is essentially is an HTTP client. So this is a software which lets you create and edit HTTP requests. So on the left side, you'll see there's a collection of different requests. And these are grouped into folders. They support the different REST verbs: get, post, put, patch, delete. And on the right side of the screen, you'll see a large set of options. And what is amazing with Postman is that you have a lot of options to customize the HTTP request. You can play with headers, with the body. You can have binary content in there. You can attach files, and there are a lot of options for the different ways you can configure all of that. You can even do a bit of automation. I'll talk about that later on. So this is the core feature of Postman requests. Then those requests can be grouped into collections. Here you can see on the screenshot there's a Postman Echo collection, which is the collection that is available out of the box when you install Postman. It's just a set of dummy requests which show basically how the tool works. Now, having said that, you can create also your own collections, and the advantage of creating collections is that it's a group of requests, and you can easily import and export them. And what we'll be sharing with you later on is a collection of Postman resources. Now, collections are powerful, but when you combine that with environments, it's even more powerful. An environment is a set of variables which have a particular value. Now, what is interesting with the environment is that you can clone it. So you can have multiple environments which share the same variable names. So when you switch to another environment, the environment takes the value that these variables have for this particular environment. So let's say when we're going to apply this to Salesforce, we'll be running queries or requests on multiple orgs, and an org is basically an environment. And so for each environment, there's the same variable name, which is, for example, username, but depending on the org or depending on the environment, the variable takes different names. So there's an environment, and there are a lot of things with templates in which we can inject these environmental variables. And finally, there's another concept of workspace. Workspaces are great because these let you package everything. So collection, environments, requests, all of that, they're all grouped into this top level entity called workspaces. And the truth is, today I've talked about sharing a Postman collection, but in fact we'll be sharing a workspace because it contains a collection, but we also have an environment with it. That's what we're going to share with you. So that's it for Postman. There are plenty more features and really interesting things that we can do with automation, but I'll cover all of that when we get into the Salesforce API collection, because we've leveraged a lot of useful features. Now, before I jump into the API collections, I want to jump to a quick demo and show you how we can use Postman. So I'll be demonstrating the basic environment for Postman. What we see right now here is a default fresh installation of Postman. And we see on the left here, we have the first collection, the Postman Echo collection, with a few of those pre-assembled queries, or requests, I should say. Now, if you select those requests, you'll see the different verbs here. You can modify those queries. The URL here is absolutely hard-coded, but this gets even more interesting when you have environments. By default, there is no environment that is shipped with the default collection. But let's just continue with that, just to do a quick tour. This particular request here is a GET request. You can see that it has query parameters, which are injected right here in the URL. If I change the values here, this will update the values there. This is pretty basic. Now, there are a lot of other things we can do. We can modify the headers. Here they're hidden actually because they're different content type. You can add your own. And you can also do things in this little tab here called tests, which lets you automate queries. And you have the ability to run some JavaScript code to do some checks and perform some operations. We'll be using that in the Salesforce collection. So that's how it works. And when you're ready with and happy with your query, you just hit send and it fires the query. Now, if you look at the bottom of the screen here, you'll see the status of the request. 200 OK means it's a successful code. This is just a standard HTTP code for success. And you can see the response here, which is JSON in this case, but it can be other types of data. All right, and you can see also the test results here, which tells us that everything was okay. This is the result of those two tests. All right, so that's really the basics of Postman. Let's now go back to the slides. I'm going to be talking about what we've created as a resource that we can use, the Salesforce APIs collection. Now, when you work with Salesforce, there are a whole broad range of APIs. And here on this slide, I've reused some of content I've presented earlier, but just to give you a sense of how many APIs there are. And this slide isn't even really an exhaustive list. The most popular APIs, the ones you use the most, are the ones on the left and center, and the ones on the right are the ones which are a bit more specific. Now, there are a lot of different APIs that you use, but the one that is the most commonly used is the REST API. The good thing with the Postman collection I'm going to share with you is that we cover 10 different Salesforce APIs, including SOAP, REST, some custom APIs, bulk, version 1, version 2. We also cover the UI API and a bit of tooling and metadata as well. Now, this list is going to evolve, of course. Again, it's an open source project, so you can actually add your own requests. So how do you start with that collection? Well, the first thing you want to do is head out to the GitHub website. I'll be sharing the URL later on. And the way it works is that you start from this GitHub website here, and you can find here the different resources for the collection, the different APIs that are supported, a screenshot, and there a link here to get the latest version of the collection. There are multiple releases, and we're always fixing bugs, adding new features. So if you just click on that one, you'll get the latest one. So how does that work? Clicking on the link gets you this type of file here, a JSON file. And this is a Postman export file, which contains, again, the collection, the environment, which is a template environment. It's just empty with name of variables, and you have to fill it up later on, and also some header presets. And then you import it into Postman. So let's take a look at that. I've already downloaded the latest version of the collection, so I don't need to download it right now. I can just directly jump into my Postman. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to isolate my work from what I've been doing here. So the best practice is to create a new workspace. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to create a new workspace. So I'm just going to name it Salesforce APIs. And here I have the option to choose either a team workspace or a personal workspace. I'm using the free version of Postman, but if you're using the paid for version, you can actually work with team workspaces, and you can share resources with version control directly embedded inside Postman. That's not my case, so I'm just going to select the basic personal workspace. Of course, I can still share it later on. So I'm going to click on Create Workspace, and there we go. We have a new blank workspace. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to import our JSON file. So the JSON file is in here. It's this one. So I'm going to drop it here, and this imports my collection. You can see here, but I have 191 requests, and I also got a template environment. Let's take a look at that. So what we're shaping with the collection is a template environment which is empty. It contains a bunch of variables here which are left empty and a few that are already pre-filled. Now, when you import the collection and the environment, what you're going to do is you're going to actually clone that template so that you can create your own specific configuration with at least username, password, maybe a token, and client ID, client secret. So I've already done that to save a bit of time here, so I'm not going to do that right now. I'm not going to fill that. But remember that the process is actually to copy first and then fill the copy on the template environment. Now, in my case, I'm going to just import the template that I already pre-filled for my org, which is here, my sample org. There we go. So now I have my configuration here. I'm not going to open it because it contains my credentials. So I don't want to show you my credentials. I'm going to switch to my sample org so that I use my environment that I've pre-filled here. And then we're going to look at the collection itself. So when I open the collection, I'll see the top level folders, which represents the different APIs that we support. Now, one thing that you need to know is that each time you want to use a Salesforce API, you first need to authenticate. That's a general rule. It's not specific to Postman. It's a very common thing with APIs. So I'm going to open the auth folder, which isn't really an API on its own, but it's a group of all the different authentication methods. And here you can see that we support multiple operations, multiple authentication types. The easiest way to authenticate is the SOAP login. That's really simple. And I'm going to show you a bit how it works, but we can also try the other ones, and it's pretty interesting to test the different authentication modes because when you're doing an integration with a third-party application, you may be tempted to think that maybe something is wrong with the parameters that you're sending, something like that. Well, with those different authentication requests here, you can simulate an authentication flow just to test your parameters very easily. All right, so back to our request. We're using SOAP login here. And notice that the URL isn't hard-coded right now. And we have this notation here with the double curly brackets. And this is a way for us to inject the environment variables. So if I hover over this URL parameter here, I can see the value that I have in my current environment. Here I have changed the default value, which was configured to go on test.salesforce.com, and I'm using a login.salesforce.com. My sample org is actually a developer edition. And it's the same thing for the other variables. You can see that they already have a value here. I didn't touch the version, it's already pre-configured. Now, there is no parameter on this one because it's not a get query. But if I go into headers, actually let me hide the auto-generated headers. You see that we have already preset a few headers in this particular request. Nothing special here. That's what is required for the SOAP plugin. And then in the body here, we have a bit of XML which contains the credentials for performing the authentication. And again, you can find here the syntax with the double curly brackets. And this is what will be replaced at runtime when I run my query by my environmental variables. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to send this request. It's going to hit my org, and here you can see that I have a status 200. So that means that my authentication is accepted. What I'm getting back right now, if I scroll down, is some information, and this will also include a token, access token. The access token is what is required for all of the other requests that I'm going to make later on. Now, do I have to copy that token manually? No, that's pretty convenient. We did something interesting with the ability to plug in some JavaScript here. And if you look at the test tab here, what we're doing with this, instead of doing an actual test, is that we are parsing the response from the server and we are extracting a few things. Now, with that particular command here, pm environment set, we're assigning some environment variables. And these variables have a specific syntax. Notice that we put an underscore in front of them. We are calling them private variables. Basically, these are variables that you're not setting manually yourself in the environment, but that are automatically set by us with some test code. So the next request that I'm going to run is going to actually leverage that underscore access token value that we extracted from this first API call to do the authentication. This way, I don't have to copy my access token across the different requests. It's going to be automatically filled up for us the next time we run a query. Pretty powerful. Right, now that we've seen the authentication command here with SOAP plugin, let's try to launch another request. So we're done with authentication. We have secured an access token, and let's take a look at the REST APIs. I'm going to do something very simple here. I'm just going to run this query to get the status of my current limits. And just to show you that the test script that ran did its job, we can see here that we have already an environment variable with underscore in front of it. And this has been replaced with my domain for my current developer edition. So you see that the variable is replaced. So let's just run that, and this will return for us a JSON response with my current limits for my developer edition. So I want to point out right now another feature which is very powerful, which is part of Postman, the ability to generate code snippets out of requests. So this request is pretty simple here. But what if I want to create an integration and use that in a third-party application? Well, I can click over here on the code button here to generate code that can run this particular request. And you can see here there's a broad range of different languages that are supported. For example, I'm just going to take fetch for JavaScript, which is a basic HTTP request. And you can see all my parameter values and everything I need to run my command. That's pretty powerful. Now we can just copy, paste this code and use it in a project. One of the most interesting things is probably the curl version. The curl version is something that you can directly run as a command line. So this is pretty powerful because you could create a shell script very easily and dump that just 2 lines of your request in there and use it. Of course, you'll have to bear in mind that the authentication token that is here is very temporary. I'm going to publish a video later on, and this token won't be valid anymore, so you don't even worry about me sharing that with you. But the idea is that you'll have to authenticate each time and reuse a new token. So you can actually chain the different commands, take the authentication command, extract the authorization token, and then use it in subsequent requests. That's it for the code generation. Let's now take a look at another example. There are plenty of different requests here, and some of them are things that you can also run on a simple tool like Workbench. Now, what you cannot do with Workbench is actually create your own queries, create your own variables, save them, and share them with your colleagues, or even run the same set of requests with different values on multiple orgs. So that's pretty convenient just to be able to switch environment and share your requests with multiple people and orgs. So that's it for the tour of the different requests we have in here in REST. I want to point out to one last thing, which is part of the tooling API. And if you're working with sandboxes, you may be interested to look into that sandbox folder under tooling. We've recently added that to a new release of the collection. We've added a bunch of commands which lets you retrieve sandboxes which are tied to a particular org. And for example, in this instance here, I have a set of 5 different sandboxes, developer sandboxes, which are tied to my org. And with those commands, I can actually do simple basic actions to run my different sandboxes. I can refresh them, I can delete them, I can clone them, all of that with Postman with just a click. And I can also generate the source code which lets me run that. So that's pretty powerful because otherwise you could do that with the CLI or you could do that with the user interface of your favorite IDE. But with Postman you can also do that right here with a few clicks. So that's pretty interesting. Right, I'll let you explore the different requests. There are a lot of them. We're going to get to 200 very soon. And I'm going to move on to the next part of my presentation. So we've seen how you can use Postman to call the different APIs, but what if your favorite API is not listed there? What if you think that a query is missing? Well, it's up to you to contribute. The project is open source, so let me share a few guidelines and explain a bit how we can contribute to the project. The contribution process is pretty simple. The first thing you want to do, of course, is import the Postman collection and environment inside your Postman client. You want to make your changes in Postman. Once you're done with that, you want to export your workspace, and there's an export feature directly in the application. This generates for you a large JSON file, the one that I just imported earlier. Then you want to use a utility we've shared called PMX. PMX is a little script I wrote, which is built in Node.js, and what it does simply is it takes this large JSON file, which contains the entire workspace, so collections, header presets, and environment, and the requests. And what this Postman extractor does is that it splits this large JSON file into smaller JSON files with also a file structure with different folders. So that makes it very easy for us to actually version the thing because we see smaller, more granular files. And the PMX utility actually has two features. It can actually expand the single workspace file or also compress it back into one single file. So in this case, when you're contributing, you want to split the files so that it has this exact same structure as the GitHub repository, and then you can create a pull request on the repository. So just to show you the structure, I'm going to go back to the GitHub repository. And you can see here the src folder here contains the file structure that is contained inside this JSON. If you try to import src directly in your Postman, it won't work. But the content of all of that, with the collection, with all the requests, with the folders you saw earlier, is represented here. It's just the main JSON file being split into smaller folders and sub-JSON files. So that's the process on how you can contribute. Now, for those of you who are interested to know how we actually build and how we actually use that, we are using GitHub with Actions. And let me cover a bit the process of how we release a new version. This is just for your own curiosity. It's not something you need to know when you're contributing, but it might be interesting to you. So how do we work? We start from the repository and we manually create a release on GitHub. Now this kicks off a GitHub action, which is automatically triggered after the version is released. The GitHub action will actually check out the source file, the src folder here with all of its subfolders. It will run PMX to reassemble the multiple files and folder into one single JSON file that Postman understands, and it will attach the JSON file to the new release. It's as simple as that. And after that, what we get in the releases section of Postman is simply a list of different releases with each containing an asset, which is the JSON file that we need to download in Postman. So when you just want to use the collection, all you need to do is just download this JSON file. You don't need to work with the repository really. You just need the JSON file here. That's it. I hope you found this interesting. I'm going to share a few resources with you before leaving you. The first one I want to share with you is the repository, and this is where you want to start. The README is pretty precise, and if you want to learn about how you can contribute, I forgot to mention that, but there is a link at the bottom of the README file giving you the contribution guidelines. So check out this file here, And make sure you give us a shout out. Myself, Philippe Ozil, and also my colleague Sébastien Colladon, who actually came up with this idea first, and it's been a great teamwork so far. So make sure you shout out and make this thing known to people, because I think it's a very valuable resource for developers and for architects. Now, if you want to learn more about the Salesforce APIs, I've selected for you a Trailhead badge, which is pretty short and also very interesting because it covers most of the top level APIs that the platform offers. It's called Lightning Platform API Basics. It's a bit less than an hour, I think, and it covers the main APIs, SOAP, REST, and a few other things. So give it a try. And this can be a good starting point to learn about the APIs. And once you've done this badge, you can probably enjoy the Postman collection even more. Now, remember that the Postman collection is not a replacement for documentation. You generally want to work with Postman on one side and the documentation on the other side. And here I've just shared with you a very obvious link, the link to documentation. If you'd like to know more about and to learn more about the collection, we also written a blog post on the Salesforce developer blog. You'll just have to search for Postman collection and you'll probably find it very easily. We're explaining a bit how we came up with this idea, how Sebastian created and assembled all of these valuable resources. All right, that's it for me. I want to thank you all for joining tonight, and I hope you had a really great time. And have fun with the collection. Again, share it, feel free to contribute. The more people use it, the better the Postman collection gets. Thank you again. Goodbye.